The wind swept across the plains of Wyoming, carrying with it the soft rattle of the grass and the faint scent of rain yet to fall. In the distance, the sun was sinking low, painting the horizon in strokes of fire and gold. But for Caleb Walker, the fading light only cast shadows upon his soul. He stood by the small wooden cross planted at the edge of his ranch, his hat pressed to his chest, his weathered face lined not from the sun but from grief. Beneath that soil lay his wife, Mary, taken from him by the fever that had spread so fast. No doctor, no prayer, no strength of his could save her. The fever had stolen her breath in a matter of days, leaving Caleb broken with nothing but silence in the house that once echoed with her laughter. He had fought drought, wolves, and men who tried to steal his land, but nothing had ever defeated him the way death did when it came for Mary. And now the ranch, the cattle, and the endless work loomed over him like a mountain he no longer had the heart to climb. He had thought about giving it up, about letting the fences fall and the herd scatter, about abandoning the land he and Mary had built together with their hands. But when he stood by her grave each morning, the words he had whispered to her in those final moments held him steady. "I'll keep this ranch alive for you, Mary, even if it kills me." Weeks passed in a blur of loneliness and exhaustion. Caleb worked from dawn until the stars came out, eating little, sleeping less, his body running on sheer willpower. Nights were the worst. The bed was too big, too empty, and the silence pressed on him until he thought he'd choke on it. Sometimes, when the fever of work burned out of him, he would sit at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from him, wishing, begging, for the sound of her voice again. But the chair stayed empty. Then, one late afternoon, as the cattle were being driven back toward the barn for the night, a wagon appeared on the horizon, thus trailing behind it like a ghost. Caleb squinted against the setting sun, his hand resting near the revolver at his hip, for visitors were few and far between, and not all brought goodwill. As the wagon drew closer, his chest tightened. The driver's hat tilted forward, hiding most of the face, but the slender frame, the posture, something about it was familiar. And when the wagon finally stopped near the porch, and the figure climbed down, Caleb's breath caught in his throat. It was Anna, Mary's younger sister. He hadn't seen her in years, not since Mary and he had married and settled here on the ranch. Anna had lived back east, in a small town near the river, working as a seamstress. She had Mary's same deep brown hair, though hers was tied back tight, and eyes that held the same shape, though where Mary's had sparkled with warmth. Anna's carried the weight of someone who had seen hardship of her own. She stepped onto the porch, her gloved hands clutching a carpet bag, her eyes meeting his, with a mixture of sorrow and strength. "Caleb," she said softly, her voice catching. "Anna," he managed, tipping his hat, though his throat was thick with emotion. "What brings you all the way out here?" Her gaze flicked to the small cross in the yard. Her face crumpled, and tears welled up. She set her bag down and covered her mouth with her hand as though holding back a sob. Caleb's heart clenched, for in that moment, it was like seeing Mary again, her features mirrored in her sister's grief. Anna stepped closer, and when she spoke again, her voice was trembling but resolute. "I came because she was my sister, and because I couldn't let you face this alone." Caleb wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't owe him anything, but the words stuck. The truth was, he was alone, and the thought of anyone standing beside him again nearly broke the dam inside his chest. Instead, he nodded, looking away, his jaw tight. "It's a hard life out here, harder than you know." Anna straightened, wiping her tears. "Then you'll need help, and I aim to give it." The days that followed were uneasy at first. Caleb was a man of few words, hardened by loss, while Anna brought with her a quiet determination and a gentle resilience that filled the house in small, almost imperceptible ways. She swept the dust from the corners, cooked meals that smelled of spices Caleb had long forgotten, and hummed softly while she worked, a habit Mary had shared. At first, the sound cut Caleb like a knife, each note reminding him of what he had lost. But as the days turned into weeks, he found himself listening for it, waiting for it, letting it ease the ache inside him bit by bit. Anna was no stranger to labor, though her hands were more used to needle and thread than to rope and reins. She learned quickly. Caleb taught her how to carry water from the well, how to feed the chickens, how to mend the fence when the wind snapped the rails. She stumbled, fell, scraped her knees, but she never complained. And in her stubbornness Caleb saw the same fire that had lived in Mary. Slowly, almost against his will, he began to admire her. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the stars began to prick the heavens, Caleb found himself watching Anna as she stood by the corral, her hair loose around her shoulders, the lamplight catching it in a halo of bronze. She was smiling at one of the calves, scratching its head, laughing softly at its playful kicks. Something stirred in Caleb then, something he had buried deep since the day Mary died. It terrified him, for it felt like betrayal to feel warmth again, to notice the curve of Anna's smile, the kindness in her eyes. He turned away, ashamed, and yet the feeling lingered. Anna noticed his distance, the way he avoided her gaze, the way he worked longer hours just to keep from sitting too long at the table with her. One night, after supper, she set down her cup and looked at him across the table. "Caleb," she said quietly, "you don't have to pretend with me. I know you're hurting. I am too. She was my sister. But shutting me out won't bring her back." Her words struck deep, cutting through the walls he had built. He wanted to tell her everything, the guilt, the loneliness, the way he felt like he was betraying Mary by even letting another woman's presence comfort him. But the words tangled in his throat. All he could manage was a nod, his eyes fixed on the table. Anna reached across and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, steady, and for the first time in months, Caleb felt a sliver of peace. The bond between them grew, not in fiery bursts, but in slow, steady sparks. They worked side by side, endured storms that rattled the windows, shared laughter when the rooster chased Anna clear across the yard, and shared quiet moments by the fire when the wind howled outside. And in those moments, when the silence was no longer heavy but comforting, Caleb began to see what he had been too blind to notice before, that perhaps God, fate, or whatever hand guided the world had not abandoned him completely. Perhaps he had sent Anna, not to replace what was lost, but to help him live again. But the prairie was not kind, and life did not allow love to grow without testing it. Trouble was stirring on the horizon. Men who had long coveted Caleb's land and cattle whispering that the Walker Ranch was vulnerable now that Mary was gone, and Caleb was weakened by grief. And though Caleb did not yet know it, the storm ahead would test not only his strength, but the bond between him and Anna, and force them both to confront the truth of what they meant to each other. The first hints of spring carried with them a deceptive softness, a promise of renewal that belied the threats gathering beyond the Walker Ranch. Caleb had begun to find rhythm again, his days no longer dragging beneath the weight of grief but steadied by Anna's quiet presence. Still, a part of him resisted, his heart torn between memory and possibility, between the woman he had buried and the woman now working beside him. He would catch himself watching Anna when she wasn't looking, the curve of her cheek in the firelight, the way her hair slipped from its tie when she worked the corral, and guilt would surge like a tide. Yet no matter how hard he tried to shove it back, the feeling grew stronger, weaving itself into the very marrow of his being. One evening, after they had finished repairing a stretch of fence that a storm had knocked loose, Anna sat on the porch with her boots off, massaging her sore feet. Caleb, leaning against the post, couldn't help but smile. "You weren't made for this kind of work," he said gruffly, though there was no bite in his words. She looked up at him, strands of hair clinging to her damp forehead, and laughed. "Maybe not, but you weren't made to do it all alone either." Her words struck deeper than he cared to admit, and for a moment their eyes held in the twilight, an unspoken truth lingering between them. Caleb cleared his throat and looked away, but the warmth of that moment lingered in his chest long after. It was in those days that the bond between them began to take on a shape neither could deny. They shared meals by the fire, laughter in the fields, silence that no longer felt heavy but whole. Anna's presence filled the spaces grief had hollowed out, and slowly, Caleb felt something he had thought lost forever: hope. But the prairie has a way of testing hearts just when they begin to heal. Word spread in town that the Walker Ranch was vulnerable, whispers carried by men who hungered for land and cattle not their own. One in particular, Jed Rollins, had long envied Caleb's spread, a cruel man with a crooked grin. Rollins believed strength was found in taking what others had built. With Mary gone, he saw his chance. One morning, Caleb rode into town for supplies. Anna staying behind to tend to the chickens. The general store was bustling, but the moment he walked in, conversation dipped. Folks nodded politely, but he could feel their pity, their whispers clinging to him like burrs. As he loaded flour and nails onto the counter, Rollins swaggered in, his boots loud against the wooden floor. "Walker," he drawled, tipping his hat mockingly. "Heard you got yourself some company out at the ranch. Mary's sister, ain't it?" The words were slick with poison, meant to sting. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the counter. "Ain't none of your business, Rollins." Rollins chuckled low. "Maybe not, but folks talk. A widow's sister, living under your roof. Some might say it ain't proper. Some might say you're already moving on." The store went silent, every eye flicking between them. Caleb turned then, his voice low but sharp as steel. "Watch your mouth." Rollins smirked, but there was a glint of challenge in his eyes. "Don't get riled, Walker. Just saying. Things change quick out here. Maybe too quick for some to stomach." Caleb stepped closer, his shadow falling over Rollins. "You come near my land, near Anna, and you'll find out just how quick things change." For a long moment, they stared at each other, tension thick enough to cut. Then Rollins tipped his hat with a mocking grin and sauntered out, leaving behind the stench of trouble brewing. When Caleb returned home, Anna noticed the storm in his eyes. She asked what had happened, but he brushed it off, unwilling to drag her into the ugliness of men like Rollins. Still, she saw through him. That night, as they sat by the fire, she placed a hand on his arm. "You can't carry it all alone. Caleb, whatever's coming, we'll face it together." Her words settled into him like a bomb, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to lean into the comfort she offered. He didn't say it, but deep down he knew. She wasn't just Mary's sister anymore. She was becoming his anchor, his partner, his reason to keep fighting. The test came sooner than expected. A few days later, under a blood-orange sunset, Caleb and Anna returned from the far pasture to find the barn doors ajar and one of the stalls broken open. Several cattle were missing, their tracks leading east. Caleb's gut clenched. Rollins. He didn't need proof. He knew the man's hand when he saw it. Fury surged, but beside it was fear for Anna, for the ranch, for the life he was struggling to rebuild. He loaded his rifle, saddled his horse, and prepared to ride after them. Anna stood in the yard, her eyes wide but steady. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. Caleb shook his head. "No, it's too dangerous." But Anna stepped closer, her chin raised in defiance. "You said yourself we face things together. If you ride out there alone, what happens to me if you don't come back? I won't sit here waiting for news that may never come." Her resolve left no room for argument. Together they rode into the fading light, the trail of hoofprints winding toward the hills. Every mile stretched the tension tighter, until the glow of campfires flickered in the distance. Rollins and his men. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, signaling for silence. Anna's eyes met his, filled with both fear and faith. In that moment, he realized the depth of what had grown between them, not just companionship, not just duty, but love, fierce and undeniable. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the cruelty of this world. Yet he also knew she had become part of his strength. As the moon rose and shadows deepened, Caleb whispered, "Stay close, no matter what." And with that, they rode into the firelight, toward the men who would test not only their courage, but the bond that had turned grief into something far greater, hope, for a new beginning.